Welcome to JAG Talk, a podcast series featuring Navy JAG community experts. Listen to in-depth discussions about different legal fields and hear insights and lessons learned from practitioners across our enterprise.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of our podcast. I'm Lieutenant Greg Lyons, coming to you from the center of the Navy universe. That's right, our favorite Norfolk, Virginia. Today's episode is going to be a good one, folks. We've put together an all-star lineup of guests who are coming to answer, inter alia, the question, VLCs, where are they now? Make sure your headphones are charged. Here we go. VLCs, also known as Special Victims Counsel and other branches, began in the Air Force in the spring of 2013. In those days, the Air Force litigated the LRM v. Kastenberg case, which was the first case in which a VLC asserted the right to be heard at a Military Rule of Evidence, or MRE, 412 hearing, meaning a hearing in which evidence of prior sexual history or disposition of the victim was being litigated. On the Navy side, Commander Sarah DeGroot and Commander Andy House were the first VLCs. Then a group of 15 reservists were brought in to help get the program started, filling one half of the total billets. We were fortunate a few months ago to hear from Commander DeGroot, Commander Jason Kanayuki, and Ms. Charlotte Cluverius about the early days of the program. In that episode, they discussed the initial challenges that VLCs faced as the first generation. Initially, the VLCP represented victims of sexual assault and other qualifying sex offenses. In December 2020, the scope of the program was expanded to include victims of domestic violence even when sexual assault was not among the charged offenses. Needless to say, since then there have been a lot of changes to VLC practice. There's greater guidance and it's clearer how VLCs can assist clients through the military justice process. That's not to say that there isn't room for growth. The focus of today's episode will be VLCs, where are they now? We'll be talking with VLCs who served at different times through the first decade of the program. We'll hear their perspectives on things they enjoyed, how they were challenged, and how their VLC tour impacted their overall career trajectory. My first guest is one of the first JAGs to join the Navy Victims Legal Counsel Program. Please welcome Commander Patrick Korody, who is a reservist now and who has his own civilian practice in Jacksonville, Florida.
Thanks for having me.
So, sir, just to start off, could you just briefly walk us through your JAG Corps career?
Sure. So after my first year of law school, I interned at NCIS headquarters, and I went back to law school, and I really had a great experience. I spent my second summer at a big law firm, didn't like it. And so my third year, I came back to the JAG Corps and I went through the accessions program, earned my commission, and then obviously went to OIS and Naval Justice School. And then I went to TSO Northeast in Groton, Connecticut as a trial counsel. From there, I deployed to Task Force 134, the Central Criminal Court of Iraq. And then I went down to NILSO, Pensacola, for what was then the Defense Pilot Program, which actually was what turned into the DSO. And then from there, after being senior defense counsel there, I went out to RILSO Northwest, where I served as senior trial counsel for just over 2 years. With regard to the VLC program, I was out there in the Northwest. I was senior trial counsel. My family and I decided that we were going to get out. We wanted to go back to Florida. And so it was summer of 2013. I remember sitting in my office, the phone rang, and it was Admiral Hanna. He said, "Hey, Patrick, I understand you want to get to Florida." And I said, "Yes, Admiral, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get down to Florida." And he said, "Well, I've got an opportunity for you in Florida." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, we're starting this new providing legal advice and assistance to victims of sexual assault." It didn't have a name. No one knew what it was going to be called, but DOD had mandated that they were going to do this and they were going to do it fast. "Where am I going?" And he said, "Jacksonville." And I said, "Hey, that'd be great." September, on my way to Jacksonville, Florida. So that sort of was the beginning of the VLC program.
Wow, that is quite the start. So, sir, when you came into the JAG Corps, did you have an eye towards military justice already at that point?
When I came into the JAG Corps, it was still under the old, model or marketing campaign, which is like, you will get trial experience. Like, we are going to hand you cases during your first tour. They held true to that. My second day at Groton, Connecticut, I was doing an Article 32 with Meg Larea. I remember it vividly, right? We did this Article 32. And after we were done, like she looked at me and she said, okay, you got it? And I said, I think so. And she said, okay, the next one you're doing on your own. I came in, I had a great first tour litigating. And so I came in wanting to do military justice because that was the draw. And, the Navy gave me the opportunity and let me do it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you really just hit the ground running. Now, more specifically looking at your VLC experience, what were your initial thoughts about the idea of this program to represent victims?
I don't even know where to start. From my senior trial counsel days back in that time frame, there was a lot of oversight on VWAP. It was really the start of, hey, making sure that, before you sign a plea agreement or before you recommend a disposition, right, that you're consulting with the crime victim. I'm like, I don't know how a lawyer would be involved in this. It seems pretty simple. And then LRM versus Kastenberg just sort of shocked the world. When we started with the VLC program, that was really it, right? We had this CAF decision that says, where the victim has a right to be heard, the crime victim has a right to be heard through counsel. And that was really all Kastenberg said, right? I'm sure you've read it. I think every VLC's read it. And I remember, we went to training. And I can't remember how many of us, but there weren't that many of us. Like by October or November of 2013, we were at the Air Force JAG School going to their second SVC training course. I remember thinking the trial counsel is going to hate us. The defense counsel is going to hate us. The judges are going to hate us. NCIS is never going to let us do anything. But then you sort of learn and we started to insert ourselves. And I think the one thing that by the end of the first year I can say is that we had proven we can be an asset to all of the stakeholders, maybe not at the same time, but on a case-by-case basis because we're representing the interest of our client, which may vary depending on what our client wants. But yeah, at first I was like, I have no clue. It was just a time of learning, trying to figure it out. One of the first cases, if not the first case I had that went to trial, the judge said, well, you can be heard. And so I show up and I'm like, Judge, but I don't have the pleadings. No one has given me the pleadings. I have no evidence. I don't even know what the issues are. How can I, argue for my client if I don't know the issues or the evidence?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be difficult.
And so I filed a couple motions to compel, and the judge is like, hey, Kastenberg just says you have the right to be heard. It doesn't say anything.
Oh, about actually having the right to the information. Yeah, ooh, that's tough.
Anything about the right to the information. So I filed a writ to NMCCA. Jim Toohey helped me. I don't think either of us had any appellate experience at all. There was no one to help us with appellate stuff. And we stopped the court-martial. We stopped the court-martial in its tracks. It was short-lived because they came back later and said, nothing in the rule says they have to turn over, the evidence. And then, of course, they modified, 412 and all that stuff to actually provide service and the evidence.
Yeah, that's totally wild. And this was your first litigated case as a VLC, right?
As you know, there's a lead time to a lot of these things to get involved. But yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting time.
A couple things to unpack there, but I thought what was interesting that you shared a little bit earlier was the difficulty of finding your role among the stakeholders and helping almost in a way convince the stakeholders of your value. I think that's a struggle that continues today. Among some providers, it's definitely a better understanding now, 10 years in, about what VLC does and the value they can bring to the table. But, from time to time, we have that same struggle. So that's interesting that it's kind of one of the lingering issues that, will continue to get smoothed over.
And, the one thing is how did the VLC prepare me to be a solo practitioner, right? That's one of the things is that early on, we were marketing the VLC program. We were trying to get clients because we were trying to convince that we had value to the victim advocates and the SARCs and NCIS and the trial counsel, right? And so, and how do you add value? Well, it depends on the case, but that's one of the things that and sort of the logistics of being alone and unafraid of the VLC in the VLC program in its early days were really two of the things that I think helped prepare me more for eventually opening up my own law firm.
One other kind of related question I wanted to run by you, kind of in this area, coming into this kind of new program. Did you ever feel kind of any conflict or concern about this, because the entry of this new third quasi party into criminal litigation?
I'm not telling you anything new, right? You know this because you've been in this job, is that not every victim of a crime wants to go to trial. Their
100% true. Yep.
Their healing process or their sense of justice may not have anything to do with getting on a stand trying to convict that individual on paper and, send them to the brig. And that was sort of the eye-opening thing for me. I mean, you sort of hear it a little bit as a trial counsel when in your very small interactions and very short interactions with crime victims. But the more time you spend with them as a victims legal counsel, it's sort of like, I get it. You don't ever want to see this person in uniform again, right? Well, there are other ways to solve that other than going to trial, whether it's by, a separation in lieu or like an agreement with the defense counsel that the guy's going to ETS if you drop charges and get off active duty, sometimes they just want restorative justice where they get an apology and it's made, from that perspective, that has really helped me understand sort of the crime victim mentality. That's important whether you're a victims legal counsel, a defense counsel, or a trial counsel. It doesn't always have to be two parties or three parties trying to punch each other in the face in court. And that was really eye-opening for me. And I don't think I would understand that without having been a victims legal counsel. And so I think if you are a mill-just person, it's an invaluable tool.
Yeah. And I think almost summarize that, and you learn that people are complex, right? And they have many different and varying motivations and desires, right, for what they hope to get through the process. So I would 100% agree with that as a major takeaway of the program, having experienced it. Not always about going to court, right? It's about coming up with the solution that meets this person's specific needs and helping them get to that decision after being informed of all their options. All right. So kind of going back to the early time period, when the program is just starting, what kind of other observations do you have of that period that you could share with us about kind of being in that first group of VLCs?
It was everything you can imagine, from like trying to find office space to paper. There's everything on that end. And, we had a lot of support from the JAG Corps. So there wasn't a lot of tape. It was like, hey, if you need it, you get it. No collateral duties. I don't know if you guys do collateral duties now, but, there were no collateral duties. We had our battle rhythm. We were briefing victim advocates. We were briefing SARCs. We were briefing NCIS. We were meeting people. We were building our client base, and we were building, these, our document library as to what we need to do the job. And there was a lot of discussion, and I don't remember whether it happened right away or how it happened, but I know you guys go through it. You still go through it. It's okay. Well, now we're going to represent children. And it was like, well, how in the world are we going to do that? None of us had ever represented a child before, because every military member is, either emancipated or over the age of 18.
Right.
Are they competent to form the attorney-client relationship? Are we forming the attorney-client relationship with mom? Like, who's the client? Is it the guardian, or is it the child? And there was no like Article 6B representative. I mean, I don't think that came out yet. So it was just exciting and figuring stuff out and making it work, right? Because we knew what the goal was. The goal was to provide effective, competent advocacy and representation to, crime victims, to make sure that their, rights were respected, to make sure that they had an opportunity to be heard by the prosecution and the community authorities and the judge if necessary. And it was exciting. It was interesting and very much focused on the clients and, the legal issues.
In terms of legal issues, what would you say were the biggest hurdles?
Practically, how do you do this, right, in the courtroom? How do you object? Where do you sit? Does your client have to be present with you? How are you going to interject yourself? I will give credit to the Air Force. They were really early on ahead of everyone else, because they're like, you just stand up and do it. And we're like, how does that work? They're like, you just do it. like you just stand up and do it. And I remember sort of giving the same spiel to our class, which was Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines. And they sort of, their jaws dropped. And I remember thinking like, that must have been like what my look was when I said that. It's like, and lo and behold, that's what you do. You just sit there in court, during the motion session, and all of a sudden you hear something. You just stand up and say objection. And, the judge looks around, is like, back then it was like, who's objecting, from the gallery, you make it work. I think probably now they're a little, back then they didn't go around and say like, hey, VLC, do you have anything you'd like to offer? I think they're probably better at that now, because I saw that as my tour was ending. The practicalities, in addition to the law, right? We were just sort of making it up on the fly and figuring it out.
Yeah, a lot of quick thinking on your feet, it sounds like. So, sir, as a person who was kind of well on their way down the Milgis track, what did you feel that VLC offered to you?
It's really that perspective that I spoke about before. It's just understanding how crime victims think. Different crime victims want different things, that, a trial may not always be what they want. That really, I think, is invaluable. And from a military justice standpoint, I think that anyone that's going to be a leader in the military justice community needs to go through the VLC program, because that perspective and exposure is invaluable. If you're going to be a military justice person, I think you really need to do defense counsel, trial counsel, and VLC, so that you have the complete perspective, how each side views things and why they're doing what they're doing. It's invaluable to have that.
Definitely wholeheartedly agree about the perspective and the importance of it. So, sir, as a defense attorney, have you had experiences where VLC has been helpful to you, perhaps in coming to a favorable resolution for everybody?
So I actually think having the VLC on board with a plea agreement is more important than having the trial counsel on board, at least in today's framework before the Office of Special Trial Counsel stands up. I routinely, as a defense counsel, reach out to the VLC. They're one of my first calls if I'm retained on a case where a VLC is involved. One of my first calls. I want to establish communications. I want them to let them know that, like, I'm not interested in immediately right away going and beating the crap out of, the victim. Like, is there an option here where we can resolve this? If there is an opportunity where the crime victim and, my client can have a meeting of the minds, that's my first call. And I think that is something that I learned in the VLC program, is, the importance of having a relationship with the VLC. You may have to fight in the courtroom for your client and advocate for your client, but there's no reason why you can't have a good civil relationship, and whether it's between prosecutors and defense counsel or, victims legal counsel, same principle applies.
What other kind of big takeaways would you say you had from your time in the program?
I really think that was not every victim wants court. It's not the right vehicle for every victim. And that is one good thing about the Navy's restricted reporting program, is that, hey, they can get help. They can, get some services without having to go through the investigation and the court-martial process. And I will tell you, my capital practice, where I deal with families of people that have been murdered, right? And normally very premeditated. I've incorporated it, and tried to reach out to victims' families on occasion to, like, hey, can we just talk about what you want? Because in my mind, I'm thinking maybe they just want an apology, right? Like, and if my client can avoid the death penalty by giving an apology, my clients, in these capital cases under the laws of Florida, if you're convicted of first degree murder, you either get life in prison without the possibility of parole, which means life in prison every day to the rest of your life until you come out in a pine box, or death. So if I can avoid the death penalty, that's great. That has probably been the number one takeaway that I've had from the program that I still use in my practice today.
I think many people who might be interested in joining the VLC program, in your experience, was it a very similar dynamic, or was it a very different experience working with victim clients versus accused clients?
The defense clients come in and you're talking mostly about the evidence, right? The evidence says A, B, C, and D. Let's talk about the evidence. Let's talk about the evidence. Let's talk about the evidence. And when you're dealing with a crime, you got to be a good listener. And that is something hard for lawyers to do because we like to talk. It's still clients. You still have to identify their interests, but I think being a VLC is a little bit different because you need to really listen to identify what it is that their interests are. It's easy if you have an accused come in, right? Because I know what your interest is. Your interest is not, going to the brig for a decade and not being a sex offender and not being a felon and, whatever it may be. And I don't need to listen to you a whole lot to figure that out. But when you're doing VLC work, one of the major components is you got to be a good listener. I think that is a skill that it definitely teaches you. And I find myself, even with my defense clients, at times, a voice in my head is telling me like, okay, it's time to shut up and listen, Patrick. In the VLC program, you sort of need to stop and listen and let them talk. And that's part of the healing process. I think that's probably one of the primary differences of being a VLC and being any other type of litigation attorney is that you're part of a healing process that you need to be cognizant of that and to what that means. And most of it to me was you got to be a good listener.
When your time in the program came to an end, how did you look back at that time? Did you see that as kind of one step in the path, or kind of how did that play in your overall career trajectory?
I still look back on it and I have fond memories of the people that I worked with. I think it was an invaluable experience. I still use the skills that I learned as a VLC in the military justice, even though I'm more in an SJA capacity right now. And I do think that military justice, command service work and legal assistance work and VLC work and defense counsel work, I think all of that, you need to know all of it because you need to understand the perspectives of why the command is doing X. I really do think it's all intertwined. In order to be effective at one, you need to know all of the perspectives and insight.
What words of advice would you give for officers who are looking into potentially joining the program?
If you ever wanted to be like an independent operator and represent clients, run your own sort of small practice, VLC's it. And I don't know what the office structure is, but our structure when we started was ones. I mean, you were one of one in your office, and then we had some twos in like San Diego and Norfolk. And I know the program's grown bigger as they've given it more responsibility and opened up the aperture of who's eligible for services. It is really sort of alone, unafraid. You have your clients. You need to represent your clients. And so if you've ever been drawn to a smaller type of practice, I think it's a great experience. I also think if you think that you want to do military justice and that is your thing, you need to do a tour in the VLC program. You need to have that exposure just as much as you need to do a trial counsel tour and a defense counsel tour. There are a lot of officers that I know that are like, oh, I'm defense, for life, or I'm trial counsel for life. And I having done all three, right, I can tell you that it's a disservice to yourself if you're not going and experiencing the other side and the VLC program, because I do think that it makes you a better lawyer, hands down, and a better judge advocate.
And to kind of close off, if given the chance, would you do VLC again?
I've always been pretty transparent that at some point I'd love to be on the bench. And so, I think that, that would probably be my first choice if they were saying, hey, we're mobilizing you, you're coming back. But, the VLC program, great program. And the idea of doing it again is, would obviously be attractive because it's what I do as a practitioner is, right, I have clients and it'd be an easy transition for me back again into, it's just clients, right? You have clients, they have a legal interest and you're advocating and assisting your clients. So while it wouldn't be my first, I would never balk at it. I thought it was a great program. And I know some of the people still involved in the program. So it's still a great program with great leaders. And I think you all are lucky that you have the opportunity to practice law in the Navy and do what you're doing.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And, I think for present day VLCs, we owe a debt of gratitude to folks in your position who came in and got this started and really laid the groundwork, right? I mean, even today, I still find templates that you made. We hopefully can continue to build on that legacy. Kind of to wrap up our discussion, I think the big takeaway that I've had speaking with you today is really VLC as a way to gain perspective and understand complexity. Commander Korody, I appreciate your time. I know you are a busy guy with your own practice, so I appreciate you coming and talking with us today about your experience.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and it's great that you guys are still going strong, and the program's doing great.
And that, folks, concludes our program. Thank you for joining me, and please join with me in wishing a happy 10-year anniversary to the Navy Victims Legal Counsel Program.
You have been listening to JAG Talk, a podcast series featuring Navy JAG community experts. Visit jag.navy.mil for additional chapters of this podcast series. Thank you for tuning in.